Добрий день, вітаю колеги, вітаю наших глядачів.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues, dear fellow participants. We are starting our online event, online discussion on newsroom survival and their needs during the wartime. It's a very complex and challenging topic for discussion. Starting from 24th of February, we are facing daily challenges regarding our sustainability, regarding our development. Unfortunately, some of us had to take care of physical survival, especially those that are based in the regions where the war conflict is the most active. Other newsrooms are addressing other issues of survival of their teams, survival of their agencies, support for their personnel. All these issues will be addressed today. Hopefully, that this discussion is going to be fruitful given the cohort of speakers we have invited today. So we will be talking about financial, physical, psychological survival and how we as a journalist community, media community can respond to those challenges and can offer support to our newsrooms and our teams. I'd like to start off by inviting our speaker from Kharkiv Press Club, Liudmyla Dolia. And my question for Liudmyla is, Kharkiv is a city where our colleagues were forced to survive physically, literally. So could you please tell us how you are coping, how you are holding up, what are your biggest challenges and what are your biggest problems? Liudmyla, over to you. Make sure your mic is on, Liudmyla, please.
Ага, дякую, дякую. Дякую за можливість розпочати цю дискусію.
Thank you for inviting me and talk about newsroom survival and needs during the wartime. Responding to your question, in Kharkiv, we are having difficulties surviving. A few words about our organization. I represent Kharkiv Press Club. That's an organization that is supporting journalists' activity. We are looking for and finding interesting topics for journalists. We organized press tours before the war so that they could compare the situation in our community and their communities. We organized a variety of training courses. One training course, by the way, was organized right before the war, before the 24th of February. And the training course was about psychological resilience of journalists and society in general, because it's believed that journalists can offer a supporting hand to journalists. After the 24th of February, we've been busy trying to relocate both our team and our newsroom. We were trying to help 20 journalists from Kharkiv and Luhansk regions who agreed to be temporarily displaced. We were also trying to support those who remained in Kharkiv and the suburbs of Kharkiv. We were offering simple assistance. For example, if they didn't have a chance to fill in the online form in order to receive the body armor from the Institute of Mass Media, we filled in those forms for them, because we know that today we might have electricity and internet connection, but they might not. Tomorrow it might be us who won't be having access to internet or will be in the blackout. Our office, unfortunately, was badly affected during the shelling, during the artillery strikes. We were next to the epicenter of the artillery strike, and because of the blast wave, our office was damaged. It's partially flooded. But there is also good news to that. We couldn't get to our office because of the active shelling, but one day we were lucky. We even managed to record one program. We managed to remove some of the equipment, and now we are trying to resume work in 4 cities of Ukraine from Kharkiv, Lviv, Vinnytsia, and Dnipro. Speaking of challenges that our newsroom is facing at the moment, because of war, because of active hostilities, most newsrooms had to stop temporarily publishing their newspapers. In our region, some of the media offer their subscribers electronic version of their newspaper. We have Mayak newspaper from Bohodukhiv. They are now working online, and they have online media. They're also trying to use color photocopier in order to make sure they publish enough papers and they circulate to the villages, to remote areas of the community, to the libraries. Of course, newsrooms had difficulty relocating, so they were choosing safer regions of Ukraine or abroad. Of course, they had issues, financial issues, especially when it comes to advertisements. We understand that during the wartime or occupation that was difficult. There were also issues with the local government because covering the news about the activity of local self-governance, that's probably not something they want to spend money on. I'm not going to steal Volodymyr Pasiuha's thunder. I think that he will fill you in on the details about that. But most newsrooms were suffering because of the scarce resources, and they didn't even pay remuneration to their employees. Kharkiv region was in the area of active hostilities and constant airstrikes and shelling. There are some territories which are not under the control of Ukrainian government. Some newsrooms, for example, are working clandestine style in the underground. I think that we will talk about that today, how we can help those colleagues of ours who are in such a dire situation. Another issue that we know of is that those territories that have been temporarily occupied, we know that the Russian aggressor is spreading their own propaganda, and they are trying to do so through printed media. For example, there is one newspaper called Krasnaya Zvezda, the Red Star. Needless to say that this newspaper is publishing the fakes, that it was the United States who waged this war. They're also trying to start their radio called Kharkiv Z. I believe that I have covered most of the issues that I wanted to. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be involved in this discussion, because this is probably the first time since the war started that we got together in this professional community, and I believe that we will develop some algorithm, something that can help all of us and each other in particular. Thank you very much. Thank you, Liudmyla, for raising such important and pressing issues. We see that Chernihiv newsrooms who are getting back to where they used to work, their offices were damaged or destroyed. I believe that providing support to those newsrooms who ended up in besieged territories, for example, in Kherson, we have one newsroom that chose to support their audience, and they keep providing the honest news. I believe support of those newsrooms is very, very important, if not crucial. Now I'd like to give the floor to Liubov. Lyubov, are you with us? Liubov Rakovytsa from Donetsk Institute of Information. Donetsk Institute of Information has been actively involved in cooperation with the newsrooms of Eastern region. Do you have any observations, any perspectives as far as the needs of your newsroom are concerned? Thank you very much for this question. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, some of the newsrooms from the east of Ukraine, they were more prepared to this conflict, to this full-scale war, and to what's happening right now, because they already have previous experience of relocation. I mean, they have had this experience since 2014. We also had this experience. That's why relocation of 2022 was seamless and not as painful as it could have been, because we were fully prepared. That's why it's very important to have action plan. In case of emergency, you have to be prepared to the crisis situation, because it's of paramount importance. Speaking of challenges, these are the challenges that not only those who are in the east of Ukraine face, but those who ended up in occupation. Because our common mistake was that we normally relied on donor organizations or commercial source of income. Unfortunately, we were in the wrong. Now the business is going through hard times, and it turned out that we were unprepared to face the challenges.
Ми останніми роками займалися диверсифікацією джерел фінансування. Це нам дуже допомогло, так само якась фінансова свого роду.
And we looked to diversify our funding sources, and we thus had a certain cushion that has accumulated since 2014, when we were left to our own devices with nothing. At the same time, we have the experience of responding or having to respond to challenges that we faced back in 2014. A challenge to the media organizations under relocation, or those who stay in the temporarily occupied territories, is the equipment, because more often than not, your equipment would be either destroyed or lost. And those who relocate have no chance to get the equipment together with them. And now there are challenges with supplies of equipment, media equipment to Ukraine in general. And the equipment that is available is either in short supply or is most expensive, that almost unaffordable. For example, cameras and the oculars for the cameras, that's what enable us to do our work, are not quite affordable. Now, the media organizations that work in southern Ukraine, and to whom their target audiences are used to following the Russian media outlets, are now under attack of media bots. And thus our organizations are under DDoS attacks almost constantly. And we have to provide for certain tools to protect our own resources from such attacks, because it is essential that we keep in touch with our audiences so that they follow what we are publishing. And sometimes we are in discussion with them, even though we switched off this option of providing comments. And we understand that our audience is in a very difficult situation due to this avalanche of the Russian propaganda. Another issue that we are facing today is that the media organizations in the temporarily occupied territories are practically the only source of information for the people in those territories. And as the situation in Mariupol testifies, when the city was besieged, so there was no opportunity for people to get any information. They were isolated information-wise, and there were only several journalists who could stream therefrom. And this picture of destroyed drama theater was published by the Russian media. And we understand in what context they would be publishing those images and those texts. And oftentimes the impression is that there is a demand for this liberation of Ukrainian territories by the Russian quote-unquote liberators. So, and it is very difficult to make sure that our partners, including their journalists, are secured information-wise again. And speaking about donors, over the last few years, donors rather focused on individual projects rather than on enhancing the resilience of media organizations or building the institutional capacity. And now we see that those media organizations that were prepared, that were hardened in the previous years, and moreover, they expanded their staff, and our media, the New Donbass, and some other media organizations that paid very special attention to building up their institutional capacity. Of course, we understand that there's huge demand for the information that we provide. Because we are at war, not only kinetic war, but also in terms of informational warfare that is being waged against us. And we need to work very hard during this serious crisis. And journalists suffer also from stress, from psychological burnout. They sometimes have to work from bomb shelters, and they report so many tragic stories. And it also is a challenge that we have to address today. Thank you very much. Okay. Okay. Yes, I would like to, one last thing that I would like to note.
Зник звуку.
Не чути?
Я нічого не чую.
There's problem with connectivity, I'm afraid. We cannot hear Liubov. She's muted herself. Yeah, I'm here. The last thing that I wanted to add is that a lot of journalists have now joined the ranks of the armed forces or territorial defense units. They've suspended their professional activities for some time, but we should remember that when the war is over, they will have to resume it, because we are at informational warfare with the Russian Federation, which is as severe as the kinetic war. Thank you. Just the issue of resilience governance and sustainability of media organizations is extremely important, because oftentimes media organizations and outlets did not have an opportunity to get prepared for this war. They were caught unawares, nor did they have the sufficient resource to build up this cushion of safety, and they need support, including financial support, very badly. I would like to give the floor to Oleksii from the Vorskla newspaper. This newspaper is unique in that they've managed to publish 4 issues of their newspaper. Not only did they publish it, but they also distributed the entire print run under these difficult conditions of the martial law in Sumy Oblast. Share with us your major challenges during those times, and the achievements perhaps that you can boast of. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I'm extremely glad to see all of you, particularly people from Kharkiv Press Club. Our village is in 6 kilometers from the Russian-Ukrainian border, and we got shelled a minute before other regions were shelled. And still we had an opportunity to take away all of our office equipment, and we hid that in various cellars and basements. Fortunately, they went through our village and they were stopped at Akhtirka. And the famous battle at Akhtirka happened then, and we were subject to a relentless shelling that continued till the 18th of March. After that, the enemy was chased away from our territory, but that did not bring the end to shelling. They continued to open fire against us from their territory, from the territory of the Russian Federation. Now, life is going on, and the territory of the entire district, which is now part of Akhtirka district, was cut off the internet. So there was no internet connectivity, nor was there any electricity supplies. Some villages still haven't got any electricity or internet connection. That's why the printed media play a very essential role. Our former brothers, quote unquote, Russians brought with them a newspaper called Родной Край, and they used to have 24 employees in this district newspaper that was very pro-Russian. We used to have 4 employees. With the beginning of the war and evacuation, one colleague joined the ranks of the armed forces. Other colleagues had to get evacuated. So I stayed put, but I was all by myself. And I understood that people do need information. Because the enemy was attacking them relentlessly through different channels. And people approached me saying, when will we get our newspaper? But it wasn't that difficult to print the newspaper, because the Sumy printing house was prepared to print the entire run of the newspaper. But the major issue was that Ukrainian postal office could not deliver the print run. Until today, certain villages are cut off those deliveries, and we now have this 8-page issue, but there's difficulty with delivering it to the readers. And I would say that local authorities did not provide assistance at the beginning, even though I voted during the previous elections for another community head, but several days after or into the war, the incumbent community head approached me and suggested that we use their printing facilities like printers and other equipment. So we printed first 500 copies of the small format newspaper. So these 500 copies were printed and then delivered manually by elder persons of the villages. And then they copied them in their own offices. So we delivered them to different villages, including the one located 1 kilometer away from the state border. But once we did that, we received a wave of telephone calls requesting that we should print even more copies. And as I said, we had 4 issues. The first print run was 500, then 1,200, then 1,500, and then 1,800. So those who could afford color printers used their printers. Those who couldn't had it in black and white. So we focused on local news, on that authorities are operating, that bread would be delivered, that humanitarian relief will be delivered. And the challenge, the major challenge, I would say, that we faced then was lack of connection with mainland, I would say. And we wanted to buy an A3 format printer, but we couldn't afford before the war. So I think we could have benefited from having it.
Залишається це контакти з Укрпоштою. Нам до цього часу не віддали наші гроші, які ми заробили ще до війни.
Unfortunately,
Now, our greatest
Ukrposhta
problem is the lack of
hasn't
delivery
given us the
capacity.
money that they owe us. They still have debts, and they say we will pay back once you resume your activity, but unfortunately, they haven't yet. And it's a unique phenomenon that the government assisted us in printing our newspaper. The war truly unites people. Do you have any questions? Thank you. We will definitely get back to you with questions once everybody made a short presentation. Now I'd like to give the floor over to Tuzov, who represents Dmytro Tuzov, who works in Souspilnist Foundation, and he cooperates with a number of newsrooms. What are some of the major challenges across the country? And what challenges do the newsroom face, those that didn't need relocation, but whose journalists are staying in the area where there are active hostilities? Thank you.
Я одразу невеличке уточнення.
I'd like to make a small clarification. We have been positioning ourselves as Radio NV, so that was our early name, and our holding was against Novoye Vremya name. That's why we got renamed, rebranded into NV, so that was our team decision. Our printed journal is in Ukrainian language. I just wanted to make this clarification regarding our name. When I'm listening to our colleagues, and I want to embrace you, I want to hug you, I want to shake hands with you. You are phenomenal. because there are people who work in Kharkiv, my colleagues, I mean, there are some people who work on temporarily occupied territories. Some are in Kherson. I can only imagine how dangerous it is, dangerous to their life and safety. They are hiding, they are trying to change their location every day, but they keep providing us the information that is of paramount importance, because we are heard in the occupied territories. We are heard where the active hostilities are going on. We are heard by people in bomb shelters, and it's very important when they hear us. You mentioned Russian propaganda. It's terrible. They keep saying that Kharkiv has been taken over, surrender and capitulate. They keep saying that Ukraine has been taken over. It's terrible. It's terrible lie. It's a sheer lie. But Ukraine keeps fighting, and we need to keep fighting, and we need to spread the true word. This war has taught us a lot of lessons, and we are talking about resilience of our newsrooms. The resilience has to be as strong as to guarantee that we stay in operation even in the worst case scenario. Souspilnist Foundation once initiated discussion that was organized a month before the war. And what we discussed back then, we decided to implement in our newsroom. Maybe not 100%, but some of the things that were seen as naive, as corny. For example, you need to have a generator and enough gas, or you need to have metal door, a reinforced door, or some bars on the window, or if there are some sabotage, subversive groups that will try to break into your newsroom, your office. So you have to have some kind of security to protect you. We were discussing all this, but when Kyiv was shelled and the radio was cut off. You remember the day when the TV tower was damaged and some of the equipment was damaged, and we were not live back then. That was very demoralizing, both for us and our audience, because our audience was becoming anxious because they got used to our radio and they couldn't have access to it. And it's understandable that we were also anxious. I mean, the whole team, because that was not an easy moment to think of. Luckily, we managed to resume our operations, and we created the infrastructure that is resilient enough so that no airstrike can disrupt our activities. We got servers in other cities. Some of the newsrooms got relocated to other cities, and basically we were broadcasting from a few cities at a time, excluding those people who were working locally. For example, in Chernihiv right after the liberation, in Kyiv region right after its liberation, in Kharkiv and other cities, you name it. And it's great that our technical support managed to put this plan into operation, and that was extraterritorial plan. So it has to be our plan so that we can work even in conditions like that. So once the Russian troops occupied Kherson, they can't find the leadership in the country. Who are those who actually organize those rallies and organize those protests and street riots? They cannot comprehend that people got self-organized. This self-organization also has to be the key principle for our newsroom activity, and it has to be organized in each and every city of Ukraine. We had DDoS attacks on our web portal. There were a few instances that attacks were so strong that the whole system nearly was down, but we were prepared to that, and during the attack, our IT group, our IT experts took additional protective measures, and they eliminated those attacks. I'm not an IT expert, but from what I know, they were using additional routing checks, and this helped to become stronger. Speaking of assistance to newsrooms, the most important thing, according to me, and it's important for people who work in the area of active hostilities. These are helmets and body armors. So that's personal protective equipment. I'm grateful to Institute of Mass Information because they were very responsive and they organized this PPE for our journalists. I'm absolutely grateful to all donors, our international partners who provided us with quality equipment, quality personal protective equipment. Our military said that it's high quality up to par. And I'm grateful for that to our international donors. We were also talking about insurance to journalists, especially those who are working in dangerous locations. We've never raised this issue before, but I will be honest with you. Even big newsrooms cannot afford such expense. But when we are talking about the problems with the advertising, commercials, because we know that few companies now advertise, when they advertise, it's most likely social advertisement or patriotic advertisement. So the budget is minuscule, unfortunately, as of now, but it's understandable. That's why insurance policy, for our journalist is one of our priorities for our NGO. Other media organizations also joined this effort of ours. We are now discussing this initiative with partners, with insurance companies, how we can implement it the best way possible, because journalists are working in dangerous conditions. They have to have not only personal protective equipment like helmet and body armor, but in case the journalist dies, we have to be realistic, or he's wounded in action, his family, her family, and the journalists themselves will have a chance to pay for rehabilitation and medical treatment. I believe that this issue will be addressed soon, and we will make sure that our journalists are protected. Speaking of technical assistance, I was talking about reserve servers. That unfortunately was done during the war, during the full-scale invasion, but we managed to do that in order to ensure the continuous operation of our newsrooms. Another thing, my recommendation to everybody is to make sure you work extraterritorially. So you have to have the scheme, technological, operational scheme, and you have to make sure that your reserve servers are working. This issue should be addressed to your technical support and those who can help you. Listening to my colleagues, I understand that communication issues between the newsroom and the journalists is very important. But mobile connection and satellite connection are also very important. I understand that it's also costly, but given the current conditions, we should have at least one channel of satellite communication, satellite connection. Otherwise, you will be cut off. There were a lot of places across Ukraine that were cut off from the continental part of Ukraine. I mean, communication-wise, there was no transport connectivity, communication connectivity. So I believe that it's very important to think about that, and we need to modernize our newsrooms and make sure that they have satellite connectivity in place. We are now working in marathon mode, 19 hours a day of broadcasting live. That's a lot. Some of our transmitters were damaged in some of the cities which were captured. But when we are talking about newsroom resilience, we probably have all the items that we had enlisted earlier. if we all follow this recommendation list, our media will remain resistant. I talked to representatives of foreign medias. They don't have this list. And I don't want to brag, but we are probably more resistant than any other media in the world because we are at war and we are broadcasting live. I don't think that any countries have this experience, but using the technologies that are available at the moment, we will be able to make our media more resistant and stronger. And I believe that our experience is absolutely valuable. Speaking with our foreign partners, I understand that they are trying to learn from us. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you, Dmytro. The issues you raised, that's mobility, information security, information protection, especially in those territories that are either occupied or used to be occupied and now they are liberated. I believe that the issue of putting the newsroom back in operation and getting the connectivity in place is very important. Now I'd like to give the floor to Kostya, who represents Internews Ukraine. I know that you are now helping in consulting, in content creation. Could you give us your perspective as far as the newsroom challenges are concerned? Thank you, Kateryna. The way I see it, local media are coping well, and so do central media when it comes to crisis situations. We can even invite them to be trainers in other hotspots, the so-called hotspots. But we have to be aware that part of our economy unfortunately suffered during the war. Media is also a service. There is also a risk that part of the ecosystem that we had been building for years might disappear. The ecosystem I refer to, this is media system of Ukraine. Whether the time is ripe that this happens right now, no. That's why it's important to support Ukrainian newsrooms financially, with equipment, with paper, anything, you name it.
So it is like the military needs ammunition, rounds and machine guns. The Ukrainian media organizations need the money, electricity, paper, money, everything, the satellite connection, that they should be sustained and enhanced, and all of that requires money. I've got one request to make of all the programs that deal in emergency response. That is, responding to this emergency situation, the situation of war. Could you include into your KPIs not only the number of grants issued or number of media organizations that you are going to support, also the speed, the velocity with which you provide this assistance. Like with ammo, you need the money now, and you need it badly. The longer we procrastinate, the longer we delay, the more the chances that we would lose the infrastructure that we've been creating for a number of years now. Yeah, a very important urging, right? Another KPI would be also diversity, not to be focused on a certain group of media. There are some media outlets or organizations that have never applied for grant support, and now they do need this assistance, and they should also be on the donors' radars so that they do not drop out of the entire media landscape. Now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Andrii Kulykov, And I would like you to speak in two capacities, or to put on two hats of yours. Just the member of a media organization, and we are now speaking about the challenges to newsrooms, and on the other hand, as a chair of the Committee for Journalistic Ethics. In these dire times, what role does ethics play? So at the end of the day, on the 25th of February, we understood that we could no longer broadcast from Krishchatyk 25, which is our regular address. Just because during the air raid sirens, we have to rush to the bomb shelters, and we got dispersed on the 26th of February, and we broadcast from our kitchens, from Kiev apartments, from private homes close to Kiev. We do not broadcast for 19 hours, but for 12 hours for sure. And the war, you will know, is going, or has been going on since 2014. But this all-out war has made us to revise our professional standards and attitudes. While we were talking that everyone should learn how to or function within the self-operated studio, some colleagues would caution us against it, because you understand that if journalists take over some of those skills, then there would be no need in the editorial boards or in editors-in-chief. But now we've learned this lesson very well, and now we know how to operate in different modes, and now we've got better laptops, more powerful and sensitive microphones, etc. So there was a period when all of our reporters had to get evacuated, but some stayed in Kiev, and only 3 our sound directors stayed in Kiev. All others worked distantly or remotely. And even from Gostomel, people got evacuated based on information they received through radio channels. And they managed to get evacuated because they got this critical information where they could not go in any circumstances, and about the places which were relatively safe. And in the occupied Ivankovo, we found a radio receiver that when relocated from one room to another could catch the signal and could bring us this critical information. And then we decided that we would rather go to the yard of our multi-apartment house and be listening to radio broadcasts together. And there were, say, 15 people gathered together in the courtyard, and then the occupiers saw this assembly of people, and they thought that we were meaning bad, and they stopped their APC, approached us, and wanted to actually frisk us. Fortunately, we had enough time to hide the radio receiver. So it means that sometimes what we tend to pay no attention during peace times becomes critically relevant and important in the times of the war. And when there's no question whether we should use the earmarked money to specific projects, or whether we can redistribute it for the urgent needs of our organization. As far as the uniqueness of experience is concerned, our experiences could be unique to us, but during the third week stay of this large-scale aggression, a producer from the USA called me to arrange an interview at 5 a.m. And she asked me where I was broadcasting from. I said, from my own kitchen, unless there's an air raid alert. And then I go to my restroom. She says, your corridor might be safer. And I then noticed that her second name was of Yugoslav origin. So I understood that she had had previous experience of the war herself. Now, on the first day when we were hiding in the bomb shelter and there was no cell coverage, we met TV journalists from India, and they asked us what we were going to do now that Kiev was occupied by the enemy. And I had to explain it to them that it wasn't the case, that Kiev was not under occupation. So we lost our comfortable studios. We learned how to connect with important people through Telegram, how to get connected with all of our co-workers, and also how to choose the correct tenor when we speak to our target audiences, so that you do not sow panic on the one hand, and on the other, that you are not overly optimistic, unnecessarily optimistic. So our live broadcast was about what to do in the case of air raid, what to do if the threat of the use of chemical weapons is imminent. So people need that, we need that, in order to know that no matter what, we are supported and we can continue working. And I'm extremely thankful to people from Kharkiv and Kharkiv Oblast who know my personal Telegram channel and send text messages to me about what's going on the ground there via channel Truha or via Huha, that's about the Russian warship, you will understand. And I, in turn, try to broadcast information about the operation of our colleagues across Ukraine in different circumstances and different conditions. Say from Severodonetsk Crisis Media Center, and Volodymyr from Kharkiv, who was forced to do so, and you will know that he is visually impaired, challenged. And I do agree with Kostya in that we have been getting accustomed to this since 1992. And we keep in touch with the Mass Media Institute or Mass Information Institute, because everything is important. The only difference being the scale. But if you apply this difference in scale to one person, then the district newspaper or hyperlocal media proved to be as important as the national media outlet. And I might say that when I heard the first air raid siren in my apartment in Peremohi Avenue, or Victory, avenue. What scared me then was that the United News TV marathon would be put in place. And I was scared lest this United Radio marathon would also be put in place. But I treasure our uniqueness, our unique identities of every TV or radio channel. Now, speaking about our channel and the Journalistic Ethics Committee, I can say that I am playing the leading role there. Rather, my colleagues have taken over this leading role. But now we still receive complaints. Do you know what was the first one that I particularly remember? It's one that the phrase about the Russian warship, that this phrase was quoted on television channel 5. And we had to consider this complaint, even though they did not use the profanity, but they rather removed one of the letters in that word. And then there was another complaint about the necessity to work with very few colleagues nearby because some of them were killed. So, and we also communicate with the European Council for Journalist Ethics when we insisted that the Russian peer organization should be expelled therefrom. We analyzed their activities and we understand that this decision was quite correct, because otherwise the Commission for Council for Journalistic Ethics should suspend our membership of that European authority as long as the Russian body holds membership thereof. And the Russian journalists say that they, or the representatives of this commission said that they had not considered complaints from Russian journalists about lack of freedom of the press. Now, when it comes to argumentation.
And the arguments is a very important principle of journalistic ethics that we have to use as one of the stepping stones. We've been attacked because they hate us, but we have to explain why they hate us. We have to explain the atrocity that they demonstrate towards Ukrainians as a nation, as ethnicity, as a statehood. Then it gives a much better understanding and the picture of the whole situation. And I believe this is our duty to spread the true word. Yesterday, I was interviewed by the journalists of one radio company, and they asked me, can one be neutral during the war? Is that possible at all? There is no statement that you have to be neutral. You can't afford to be neutral, but you may be objective. Again, based on justification, substantiation, reporting facts and not fiction. Another aspect, it might seem minor to some of our colleagues that we have to be careful with words. When we are talking about the horde invading Ukraine, I remember that the horde, so that was the form of society in some of the ethnicities, including Tatars, who are friends to us. It's not the horde who invaded our country. However, this comparison might seem nice. That was the empire that attacked us and invaded our country. I understand that I have to stop here. Yes, thank you, Andrii. We also have a story in our organization that some people called us, and we were in the basement, and they say, can you say something positive? It's important to stay positive. Now I'd like to give the floor over to Serhii, Harmash. What we see now is there is a dynamic demand for information from our audience. The audience, our digital audience, is growing exponentially. And it's not thanks to advertising or other resources that help this media up and running. How do you see survival? What are some of the survival recipes? And what kind of support you need most right now in order to hold up and keep operating? Thank you. It's a very interesting question, to be honest. Now and now at the beginning of the war, these are two different nows. Money that we need now, of course, is important, but in early March, we also needed funds to pay salaries. In early April, we needed money to pay salaries and relocation money because some people were forced to flee their homes and they had to leave everything behind. Some of them left equipment which was pricey that they were using, for example, printer. I know that the accountant cannot print the documents having no access to printer, and they cannot do the bookkeeping and accounting. Unfortunately, not everybody managed to cope with all the difficulties. We received assistance, but sometimes it was not timely, taking into account that people had to relocate. So that was difficult. These were not grants that we were receiving. I think that we had to pay to receive more assistance in order to compensate to people so that they can find their feet in the new place and organize their daily routine. That used to be the problem. Now I believe it's not anymore. Some of our colleagues come back home to Kyiv. Some find a new home in a new place. And we need different types of assistance right now. So what used to be necessary is no longer important. I believe that it's going to be easier. We keep receiving grant support. Those who received it can now use it to their advantage, but some, unfortunately, never received it. Some of my colleagues, for example, they had to leave the country, but that was their choice. That's individual choice of everybody. But we invited some of our partners who were working in district newspapers. We invited them to be part of our team. I understand that there are no district newspapers in occupied territories, so we decided to use this manpower, this cadre, in order to replenish the lost personnel who had left abroad. It turned out that the most important issue that we faced during the early days of the war, that was technical problem, because that was related to the issue of availability of servers that were not in Ukraine. Because if Kyiv was captured, we wouldn't be even able to do online work. We have some servers in Kyiv, but luckily we managed to get grant support in order to place some of the servers abroad. I believe that we all need to think about that as plan B, and we need to think about placing our servers abroad. Speaking of ethics, it's clear that we will be talking about propaganda. It's unavoidable, unfortunately. Propaganda, as the word, is not bad, but the essence is about spreading evil and spreading evil knowledge. So it depends on what kind of knowledge you spread and how objective the knowledge is. Now I see that there is active, heated debate among the journalists, and according to me, I believe that we do have propaganda. Unfortunately, propaganda won the battle at the beginning of the war to mobilize society. There will be less and less of it as the time goes on, because people get used to war and they get used to propaganda as well. And unfortunately or fortunately, it has not the same effect as it had at the beginning of the war. Now I believe that we need to find this golden middle, and we need to get rid of this populistic propaganda, and we need to get back to providing just factual news. Lots of our editors and journalists believe that they are participants of information war, and they decide what information needs to be released and what need not. But I believe that the information that we offer has to be objective. We should not only talk about good news. Yeah, I believe we've got enough of Arestovich. We need to offer objective news, objective information to our people. People need to know that we are not only winning, but we are also losing. So some of the territories are still under occupation. We need to honestly address all questions, including Mariupol, including Russian troops trying to capture access to the sea, and how they are progressing towards the south of Ukraine. I believe that we need to get back to normal routine, normal work. We have to be more objective, and this objectivity has to be well balanced. I'm talking about good, bad news balance. And then we won't have this cognitive dissonance. So that, for example, during the negotiation, the talks with war, we can put aside the issue of Donbass for 15 years. And it's not clear why. If everything is so good, if everything is so green in our garden, why are we in the talks with the Russian Federation at all? So we need to make sure that our reality is perceived truly and objectively, and we need to make sure that we release objective information, including information on our marathon. I believe that radio offers more objectivity. Speaking of marathon, I think there are issues that I'd like to address, and that they will be addressed slowly but surely once we are back to our normal routine. Thank you very much. You're right. During the previous online discussion, we were discussing where the limit should be between the broadcasting in the martial law time. There should be some intermediary stage. And we also were discussing regulation issues, legislation issues. These were very important things. My question for Taras, who represents Souspilnist: how can we support newsrooms in those challenging times? When I'm talking about we, the first person plural, I'm talking about the community who are organizations of media development, media support, including our international partners and allies and colleagues. What are some of our priorities at the moment? Thank you, Kateryna. Welcome, dear colleagues. Thank you for having me in this studio. According to me, it's great that Ukrainian journalists stayed united over the past 30 years. They were standing for their rights, they were cooperating, they were working in solidarity, especially in hard times. And today we can see this journalist help and assistance. So I believe that we've been helping each other since day one of the war, logistically speaking, accreditation-wise. We were sharing PPEs, we were sharing video materials, video footage. I've seen Ukrainian journalists helping their overseas colleagues. It's a very important factor. There were even instances, special instances of journalist solidarity. I was amazed by there is media center in Ivano-Frankivsk. There was one case that in order to relocate part of the colleagues from Vilna Radio, that was following the request of Nastya Shibina, one of the journalists even said that I can vacate my own apartment and let colleagues from Bakhmut stay there. So that was amazing gesture. So Katya was also amazed, and one of our colleagues from Bakhmut even got a job there. There were a few situations of that kind, but I remember the relocation of newsroom called Dmytro Rudne. They also had to relocate, and there was a similar story. And we always see how journalists can support each other. They can offer each other their shoulder, their supporting shoulder. Solidarity is a very important factor.
Канал постачання радіобоксів мобільних зарубіжними.
That was a channel for delivering radio boxes shared with us by our overseas colleagues. And together with the national media associations, we did that to see how radio broadcasters actually gave priority to local media organizations, which testifies to this support at the level of the newsrooms and editorials, etc. So that is yet another evidence that we've covered a very long road. And this solidarity and this preparedness to lend a helping hand is very important, and it can be disseminated as a message, because today we've got a lot of powerful media organizations, media movement, independent media council, the Commission for Journalistic Ethics. They are very potent players, and they've enhanced their power over the last several decades, and they impact decisions taken by different media organizations, particularly in certain situations whereby you have to look for compromises. And today's joint statement by the Ministry of Defense and Ministry of culture and information policies on the one hand and the journalist community on the other merit special attention. So this solidarity and mutual support on the part of the journalists, particularly at the level of regional, local media organizations, exist while we face new challenges, and we have to look for new solutions to those challenges. We mapped the needs for support and assistance in our organization, and we can see that alongside security challenges, we see also a lot of needs related to economic situation, and the list of such challenges as a shortage of staff and preservation of your human resources, whereby, again, some organizations have lost up to a half of their employees. There comes a shortage of money for salaries, for upgrading equipment, for purchasing equipment, for relocation, and there's also lack of stabilization funds. Prior to the war, we discussed all of those challenges, but many media organizations could not cope with them on their own. And perhaps today, we should also encourage large media organizations and associations to facilitate and promote the message that local media, regional media do need this support, particularly timely support. And those media organizations actually depend on such support for their survival. So we have to preserve the media organization and their audiences, their readers, their viewers and listeners, because local people usually believe their local media outlets. And it would be great if we could make sure that they survive these weeks and months of war, overcome these temporary difficulties, and persevere in their operation. And we should also think how to provide support to those journalists who operate in the combat zone. We understand that we should also look for opportunities to provide insurance to those journalists, and we've looked into these issues, and now we are about to provide full coverage, insurance coverage to those journalists. And we will launch this insurance fund in the very near future, because there are a lot of media organizations willing to send their reporters to certain hotspots or to the front line, and they should be properly insured, of course. If we look at the situation in the media community in general, and I can say that we are strong thanks to this solidarity, which is a factor of victory to all of us. Thank you.
Microphone, Pani Kateryna.
Kateryna, you're muted. Yes, thank you. I was asking if we could be seen and heard, because we saw a picture on the screen that we didn't share, actually. So thank you, Taras, because you're right. Our mutual solidarity manifests itself in minor matters, and sometimes the organizations that provide such financial support ask for the priority of those needs and are prepared to support smaller organizations first and the larger organizations later. So, Anna, I would like to ask you what ways of supporting newsrooms and media organizations do you see the Institute for Democracy, named after Pylyp Orlyk, cooperates a lot with local media organizations. So would you share your insights with us? Thank you, Kateryna. As the Democracy Institute named after Pylyp Orlyk, we provide training, monitoring, and good advice. As far as my assessment of the operation of the media organizations today, I can tell you that our latest monitoring was completed with the expression of thanks to all of our colleagues because they continue to work and to provide information to the Ukrainian public. I also support the idea that we should enhance our capabilities in terms of satellite connectivity, and we should be looking at some contingency plans. Money is a factor, and of course, this money should be provided timely in a speedy and effective way. In Sumy, Oblast and I cooperate with media organizations there. The journalist union there received information about available financial support. I also agree with those who say that there is no difference whether the news outlets work locally or nationally. All of them deserve support, but particularly those who work locally. You know that the Oblast situated close to the Ukrainian-Russian border suffer from air raid most, and they should be heeded specifically. So, and they work in especially hard conditions, sometimes with no cell coverage, without radio access. They are doing what the government should be doing, ensuring that information is available to the people. And we have to focus our efforts in inviting the grantors to share in that effort, to support smaller outlets, smaller media organizations working close to the combat line or combat zone. I spoke to one of the journalists from the local news paper from the village of Grabovka, and the state border runs across their own orchard. So, and they are shelled constantly, and in order to make a telephone call, they have to walk several kilometers to have their cell coverage. So some people said that print media will die out gradually and all of the information sharing will migrate online. Now we see that that's not the case. We also observed today, particularly in the Oblast close to the state border, that there's a need to address their challenges very timely, very quickly. As far as the dissemination of the newspapers via the Ukrainian Postal Service, you know what the situation in Akhtirka is like. You know that their organization suffered from shelling, and they were in a hurry to have an issue of their newspaper, and last Thursday they got this print out ready, or print run ready, and they were very glad that this newspaper could be finally distributed. So he was extremely happy that it would be the first newspaper to re-emerge after the occupation. But when they contacted the employees of the Ukrainian Postal Service, their response was that the delivery will only be possible on Tuesdays, in 5 days almost. And Akhtirka is easily reachable, and the newspapers can be delivered there. So Ukrainian Postal Office laid out a lot of posts, men and women, even before the beginning of the year. So they have got this shortage of personnel, and they should have thought about it well in advance. So we should be thinking about this alternative network for distributing local newspapers, because no matter how hard editors and crews work to have their newspapers up and running, the newspapers cannot eventually be distributed. And that is a very important issue that we have to raise and resolve. Another one that I would like to raise concerns Kharkiv. Kharkiv suffered a lot, and a lot of local newspapers were printed in Kharkiv. And now Vinnytsia is ready to take over, but can you imagine the workload that they have got today? So we should be thinking about providing certain technical assistance, perhaps to smaller printing houses that can also step in and shoulder this responsibility. Now, people spoke about the personnel available today. I would not comment on that anymore. But again, we have to show solidarity. We are journalists, and we say that we should provide information timely. But we fail to show this solidarity when it comes to advocating our interests in our relations with the Ukrainian Postal Office. We are thankful to sponsors and foundations that support local media outlets, but the government should actually pull their bit, pull their pot.
We all remember about the reforms that we've been implementing. We remember that there were some laws and bylaws that were enacted, and we were receiving 50,000 support. At least that support was allocated, but no one received it. So what was promised was never put in action. We now need to develop some governmental support programs, I mean, media governmental support programs, because there are lots of newsrooms that lost equipment, they lost offices. We know that even computers were stolen even from schools. Maybe Russia is missing a few computers, but when we are talking about expensive equipment that printing houses were using, so that's a total different stories. And of course we need support. We need it today. We need to talk about it. We need to discuss it. This issue has to be raised by non-governmental organizations that work with media and for media, because the time is ripe to discuss this. Thank you very much. Thank you, Alla. The support from government funds and government support was discussed in March. We were talking about creating media fund, state media fund that would be supporting media agencies, but we know that cultural fund, Ukrainian cultural fund, will not get any allocations from the government this year. And unfortunately, there is no money for the fund of media support. Dmytro from Internews Ukraine, you will be our last speaker. Dmytro Zinchuk, could you give us your perspective on how you see the follow-up steps and important things that need to be done in order to support newsrooms, things that we failed to mention, but things that we as community have to keep an eye on? Thank you, Kateryna. Thank you, everybody. What I wanted to say has already been said by my colleagues, and I understand that almost all media faced different challenges. We were talking about challenges faced by media in the front line, in those regions that were occupied or besieged. To a lesser degree, we were talking about newsrooms in the center of Ukraine and the west of Ukraine. But they also had their own challenges because the active phase of war affected the activity of all media. When we are talking about the donor support, grant support, of course, we need to channel our energy to help those newsrooms that are in the east of Ukraine. But I know for sure, for a fact, that regional media are also on the brink of survival. They were probably less prepared to face some of the challenges. I'm not sure if I heard it today, but I talked to newsroom across Ukraine, and we did a survey at the beginning of this year. I also talked to representatives of media from other regions of Ukraine. We are updating our survey, and they all keep saying that losses that all media suffered because they don't have advertisements. In Ivano-Frankivsk, for example, their revenue is 90% smaller. In Frankivsk, some of the printed media is no longer printed, so they offer online version of their paper. Those who were investing into website development before the war, they are now in a much better situation. Donor organizations were trying to help media become more resilient and get adapted to new conditions to stay competitive. Online presence is very important. Remember that young people are only in online. Printed media is no less important. We've been talking about that before the active phase of war, they were important in Luhansk. It was important to help regional newspaper, but just for an example, those who had a chance to relocate, so they have a possibility to keep working and publish news, at least online, and donors have access to their information. But those newsrooms that didn't have such possibility, I'm not going to drop the names, but they still are our partners. Some of them, they cannot print their newspaper, they cannot distribute their newspaper. Some of them relocated, but they didn't have a website. So if they had had one before the war, maybe the situation wouldn't be that bad. Those who realized that there was a need to develop proactively, those who understood the possibility of the challenges. So now they're in a better situation, but we are really grateful to pandemic times because that experience came in handy. I'm not talking about those who had similar experience in 2014, but pandemic. So actually it made us introduce the tools that we are using right now. So Zoom, messengers, etc. So it's not necessary to go and do the video footage on site, but you can actually do it online. I believe that these tools are already tried and tested. They are used across Ukraine, including Kherson. So I'm talking about websites. Lots of media are working. They prepare their programs, their footage, and people, they even have bigger readership number-wise. So I believe that this is the trend that we've seen recently. I know that some websites have more readers now because they are trusted by the local audience. They are looking for information of what's happening in Ukraine, and they visit the websites, they read news. I talked to my colleagues from Lviv, and they said that we were, our main priority was national news, but now people are greedy for local news. They want to know what's happening locally, and some of the newsrooms are now focusing on the local information. And I know that the audience is trusts us, and support is colossal. A lot of international organizations are doing a lot in order to help. And I know that we have a lot of needs, but there are a few things we need to focus on, like essential needs, safety, remuneration, psychological help. A lot of journalists have difficulty covering war news. Yesterday, my colleagues talk about stories they have difficulty writing about. Some of the journalists are internally displaced persons, and they need psychological assistance. That could be training, that could be mental health provider, etc. Assistance in salary.
And we actually discussed that in April earlier, and it's a pity that we were not prepared to raise money for this type of work. Only recently have the donors realized the need for this assistance. Now, digital security, Internews, even before the war, raised this issue all the time. And we see that the training in digital security tools, how to have your site protected against DDoS attacks, for example, that you should not keep your server where you are located, but somewhere else. So just those institutions that have done that are better prepared. And I remember that during one of the trainings, when we were told how to protect your digital security, we're so well prepared that they were so well prepared that actually we thought that his entire lecture, the trainer's lecture, was akin to a detective story. So providing personal protective gear to journalists working at the front line, making sure that they've got all of the gadgets like video cameras, mics, and in occupation, journalists have to conceal their belonging to this professional. And only then will we be able to speak about relative stability and safety of the journals. Then we also speak about fundraising tools, about donation programs, so that the media organizations are prepared to cover up for the co-workers that have fled Ukraine. And speaking about the Telegram channels, a lot use this channel as the source of information, but I believe that Telegram channels are now trusted more when they are not anonymized. Right. Thank you very much. Thank you. I see that we've got a comment from Andrii Kulykov, but be very brief if you may, because our time is running.
Dmytro.
I share the ideas that Dmytro vented about the assessment of the state-of-the-art media tools and media in general. I would say that heritage media are also very important, because I read from one of our colleagues that the one who supported enemy was the one who destroyed the network of wire broadcast. So people in liberated areas haven't got access to a website because they haven't got Wi-Fi, but sometimes traditional heritage media should also be paid the necessary heed to. We work for the audiences, and we have to make sure that they have access to heritage media as well as to the technically advanced media. And besides, there is also a trend towards over pessimism or over optimism in digital media. So, we've heard lots of different ideas, and I can't read all of those that you shared in the chat, but my general impression is that we see eye to eye to the need, particularly in these times, to support the media community, to provide them with every opportunity to continue work. And when I speak about media community, I mean different media organizations and outlets, traditional, national, smaller, online. Just all of us matter today, particularly in the times of the war and after the war, when we support the reforms, the rebuilding of the country, so that we discuss extremely important topics with our respective target audiences. For that, we need the money, equipment, expertise, shared expertise and consultations. I would like to thank all of you for sharing your ideas, and I encourage you to read the exchanges in the chat. I would like to thank Oleksii for sharing his ideas about the ad market and about the work of the Ukrainian Postal Service. Everything is going to be Ukraine, and together we stand strong.